Hello, I'm the Grub Street vlogger, and my hair is reaching Francis Ford Coppola Dracula levels of crapness. But we've just had March, so let's go through some of those March books. I started off reading The Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe. And it's a big old beast, and I think, like most people who read The Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne, and I can never say Udolpho right, Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe, like most of those people, I think I was probably reading it because Northanger Abbey recommended it to me. And do you know what? I wasn't as disappointed as other people who've read this because Northanger Abbey has recommended it to them. It's a book where you have to just let it go. You just have to flow. It's like a lazy river. If you let it take you away, you're going to have a good time. But if you try and fight it, or indeed if you try and engage with it the way you'd engage with a normal novel, then it is tough going. There's a lot of description of plants and trees. The larch is in there a lot. Mountains, waterfalls, all that kind of stuff. There's castles. There's multiple castles, which is weird. The bit in Udolpho is genuinely absolutely exciting and gripping, and what's going to happen? And then they escape that, and they go somewhere else, and they go to another castle, in which, why put your less threatening castle after your most threatening castle? That seems a very strange way to structure it. But, as I say, if you go with the flow, you have a really good time with the book. It really takes you away from this terrible life into this terrible life that she's having. She's having a bad time, our main character in this. And some people don't like old Emily St. Aubert. Some people think the main character in this book is soppy and sappy and weak and faints and cries all the time. And I mean, she does a lot. I saw this infographic where she is the top fainter out of all the gothic novels. But you'd be amazed how many times she feels faint and then fights it. And you'd be amazed how many times she wants to cry and then doesn't. Or she wants to cry and then waits until she's alone. She's a lot stronger, I think, than she's given credit for. Because she's this girl who's had this idyllic life, and then all of a sudden her mum dies, then her dad dies. Her auntie looks after her, marries an evil man who takes her off to a demonic, possibly ghost-possessed castle with maybe a dead body in it. So, she's not got an easy time of it. And I think she does better than I probably would on the old fainting, crying, and being pathetic stakes. She's pretty strong. Now, pathetic is her love. He's pathetic. I want to call him Valmont, but that's from completely different book. He's so pathetic. I forgot Valancourt. I'd forgotten his name. When she and Valancourt split before she goes off with her aunt, he's the one in pieces, and she's the one going, "We've got to be calm. Don't worry. We shall see each other. We'll work through this." And he's the one. And he's pretty pathetic throughout. I did not like Valancourt, but Emily St. Aubert was all right, and it is quite creepy. I mean, it's famous for its ghosty stuff, but again, St. Aubert, she's not a character who's that worried about the ghosts mostly until the third castle, where, for reasons that get explained later, the ghost stuff seems a lot realer. But when she's in Udolpho, the problem she's got are things like she can't lock her own door, and it's full of drunk, rapey men. That's her problem. She has a very real problem. And the tension is there, and so is all the descriptions of trees. And you know what? If you let it go, you enjoy it. Just try not to fight it, and try not, weirdly, to engage with it. Just let it take you. The next book I read was Brothers of the Quill by Norma Clarke. Bit of a rare one, this one, in that it's a reread. I read this about 4 years ago, 4 or 5, when it came out. I really like Norma Clarke. She has written some brilliant books. 2016. And I was so excited about this one when it came out because it's about Oliver Goldsmith. That's not Oliver Goldsmith, who I'm a big fan of. And when it came out, the first time I read it, I was like, oh, I really like that book. But it wasn't the biography of Oliver Goldsmith I was hoping for. And rereading it this time for the Dr. Johnson group, I realised it wasn't ever promising to be that. It never claimed to be a biography. It's about the social sort of pressures and influences on writers in the 18th century, as seen through Oliver Goldsmith and his contemporaries, specifically his Irish hack writer contemporaries. And we see how Oliver, navigates it and how all these friends of his navigate it. And it gives you a bit of more of, what's the word? Kudos to Oliver, because he's often known as this fool with a blessed pen, a blessed quill. But if you see him in context and the other people around him, you realise that he actually is quite a canny operator. The fact that he made these social gaffes, or that people like Boswell didn't get him, and I don't get Boswell, to be honest, really, compared to the way he managed to fulfill his contracts and to write things that people wanted to read every time, he really was very good at reading his audience and giving them what they wanted. And it's quite interesting in how, in doing that, he becomes this man of contradictions. He doesn't like patrons, but he takes a patron. He's very against slavery, but his patron is the MP for Bristol, who is trying to put slavery measures in place because Bristol relies on slavery. And in fact, because it's about the social thing and how that affects the writers, in the meeting which Norma Clarke was at, she described it as, seeing how these men navigated this big system that they're all trapped in. Slavery was quite interesting because you got Oliver Goldsmith, who's against it, but he'll suck up to someone who isn't if he needs to, especially because that someone who wasn't. Nugent, the MP, was also Irish, and they agreed on Irish liberty. So they had a lot they agreed on, even if they disagreed on slavery. Then you've got people like Smollett, which I didn't know. Smollett could pretend to be the gentleman writer, not the hack, which he actually was when he started, because he married an heiress of Jamaican fortune, slave fortune, and so he could pretend to be above everything. And then you got people like Granger, who went out there supporting someone else, and he got married there, and he became a doctor, and he tried to write a poem all about sugarcane, and it was supposed to be a West Indian Georgic, was the idea. And he mentioned slaves in it, and the way he tiptoes around this problem, because he can see it's a problem, but he doesn't want to upset things. And then Boswell, of course, who said that the slave trade should maintain because the money was so good. So yeah, so it's not about slavery. That's one of the many things. It's really good how it uses Goldsmith as its sort of centre pin, and then it spirals in these other directions about different things and how they affect Goldsmith and the writers around him. And it's full of wonderful stories like Samuel Derrick sleeping in his friend's baby's cot with his feet poking out, or this guy called Heffernan. Oh, names are hard for me today. Heffernan. And Heffernan was a doctor and a writer, and he resurrected someone who'd just been hanged. And that person picked his pocket and ran off. Which is the thanks you get for resurrecting someone who's been hanged. So yes, a really good book. I recommend that one. The next is another non-fiction book called The Zoo by Isobel Charman. And I made a particular point of saying it's a non-fiction book because it also is not a non-fiction book. It's the most peculiar thing. The writer is a documentary maker. And I think that influences it. Because it's like one of those documentaries with the weird reenactments. And you see the weird reenactments, okay, it's bringing it to life, but was it really like that? She does that. It's all about London Zoo and the founding of London Zoo. And the structure's very clever, actually. It's a very good idea. It's like a group biography with each chapter being a new person. And the way they lead into each other is brilliant. So the person who wants there to be a London Zoo, it's about them. And first job is to get an architect. So next chapter is about the architect. And it moves through different people who are important in the history of London Zoo. And it's very good. And I like the segues. The trouble is, those chapters aren't written as biographies. They're written as short stories. And it undermines the truth of the book. So you've got Decimus Burton, who is an architect. And there's a scene of him going into the headquarters of the Zoological Society of London, and being molested by a monkey who takes his hat. And there's a little note at the back, I like that. Little notes at the back to tell you what's going on. And it tells you, yes, there was a monkey that took hats. And Decimus Burton did go in the office sometimes. But whether the two ever met, actually, not known. And in fact, in these notes at the back, sometimes the author just admits to making stuff up. I made up the rivalry between these two people because I think that's how it might have been. Or I made up how this person felt about this because other things they said implied this might be the kind of thing they might think. So it's a book that doesn't work as a novel, and it's a book that doesn't work as a history. However, the story it's telling is fascinating. The story of London Zoo. I mean, when you set up your zoo with a fully staffed taxidermy department and a 1 3-day-a-week vet, you know you're going to lose a lot of animals. And it was almost like a running mystery in here. Just all these animals, like kangaroos getting brain tumours, and lots of animals in the carnivore enclosures having troubles with their lungs, and monkeys going mad, and the great apes never surviving more than 6 months, even though they've been at sea for 3 years. And that mystery is never solved. You never find out why all these animals keep dying, and you never find out when and how they made things better. And that was the thing that was most gripping to me, and I was kind of lost. So yes, a book that I can see what they're going for. Lively, exciting history in a kind of novel-y style. But it doesn't work because the novel bits undermine the history and the history undermines the novel. And it's not successful, let's say. The next thing I read was called A Lost Lady by Willa Cather, which describes itself here as the Madame Bovary of the American frontier. And that was kind of what interested me about it. I thought, oh, okay, I love Madame Bovary, so I'll read this. And it's nothing like Madame Bovary. It's very good, though. One of the biggest differences between this and Madame Bovary is this is told in a very flat, cards-on-the-table style. Willa Cather tells you what people look like. It tells you what people are feeling. You're just told. There's no, and when she does paint a picture, it's still very this. There's not room for a significant detail representing the whole, particularly in this. And if there is, she'll then tell you why it represents the whole. It's very, very plain, and I found it quite engaging. I like that style of telling. I prefer Flaubert. Controversial opinion. Because he's in my mind, he's the writer who best sees the specific detail that can tell you about the whole. He is the king of specific details. But still, it was very entertaining. It was about a lady, and she's called Marion Foster, and she's married to an old sort of prospector who did train lines. And the first chunk is about them at their height to when they suffer a setback. And then the second chunk is a few years after their setback, as they go into real decline. And it's all narrated by somebody called Neil, spelt wrong. It might be Niall, but it's Niel, which even the blurb has Neil, but the book had Niel, and so did websites that said about it. So, yeah, he's a young boy who idolizes this woman, and as he goes on and lives, he doesn't idolize her anymore. She is lost to him, and the fact is, who gives a shit? Because I wouldn't have bothered trying to earn his respect. His respect didn't mean anything to me. In fact, the book isn't really about the woman. It's about her husband. It's about him and how he represents the lost sort of frontier ways. Because actually the woman doesn't even get lost. By the end, we find out that she's married this British man and she's rich and she's doing perfectly well. She doesn't get lost. But her husband, the prospector, the railway man, he does get lost. And he represents the old ways, the kind ways, and the new ways are represented by this guy called Ivy Peters. And he is manipulative, he's sneaky, he is ruthless, and he only wants money. And so it's the old ways being replaced by the new capital ways. And I have to say, as a message, it's not one I particularly like, because when I hear one saying, "Oh, those good old days when the rich people were the holders of all that's good and decent, and oh no, now the less rich people have access to money, and that means everything is crass and terrible," I'm not much on your side, because I'm more of the not rich people than the rich people. So the ultimate message of this didn't particularly appeal to me, but the writing was good and the story was enjoyable and it was perfectly fine. Unlike this next novel, Memoirs of Emma Courtney by Mary Hayes, which is perfectly not fine. This is crap. This is really bad. I'm sorry, Mary Hayes. I love the cover. I love the way she looks at you. That's not her, by the way. It's just a painting. So, this story actually needs some backstory. Woohoo. Mary Hayes, she loved this guy called William Friend, but he, Dunham, friend-zoned her. And so she went crazy out of it. She was really, really upset. She really loved him. She'd written all these letters about her love for him, and they were all unrequited. And her friend William Godwin, who wrote Caleb Williams, and later married Mary Wollstonecraft, said to her, "Hey, you could turn this into a novel. You could get out your feelings and make a bit of money out of it, make a bit of artistic stuff out of it." And she thought, yeah, okay. So that's what this novel is. It has her real love letters as the centre. And the build-up's quite interesting. It's all average. Girl, she's been brought up, her parents die, she's brought up by her auntie, she has these early experiences. Yeah, it's perfectly decent. And then the love letters start. And no wonder the person she was writing to, William Friend, didn't like her, or didn't like her in that way. Because she's trying to prove through the love letters that she as a woman is as rational as a man, which, apart from anything else, I'm convinced women are more rational than men anyway, because I've seen way more men get upset and flail about like toddlers than women. But that notwithstanding, she's convinced, it's all about education, which is what Mary Wollstonecraft thinks. There's a guy called Helvetius, who is a French philosopher who is building on Locke. And Locke said, the mind is a blank slate and we learn by what we take in. And so Helvetius is then, this is education is the key. Everybody of every gender and every race has the same stuff, and it depends on what they take in. And so she's trying to prove in her love letters that she's taken in the same rational, moral goodness of men, that she's not a hippity-dippity flighty woman. This means she writes love letters that read like a debating team. So they're love letters where she cites the 4 reasons he might not want to be with her, and then logically takes them down one by one. Not only are they boring, they're bludgeoning. Love letters, I've not written many, and the ones I have written have been unrequited, but love letters should be lovely. There should be pleasure in it. They should please and tease, and she's not doing that, because she's trying to... We shall deal with each other as rational souls, and that's not how a loveliness works. Even less in a book, and it brings this book to a stop. And then to make up for it, she has about 3 novels worth of plot that happen in 20 pages. There's divorce, there's marriage of people that shouldn't really be together, there's infanticide, there's suicide, there's depression, madness, all in 20 pages. And that's the book. And it's rubbish. So sorry, Mary Hayes. Next thing. Drinking Coffee Elsewhere by ZZ Packer. And I find it hard to say ZZ Packer because the English in me wants to say ZZ Packer. But she's not. ZZ Packer. And this is a collection, with 1 really great short story in it. And then 7 absolutely wonderful bits of novels, as far as I can see. All of the writing in this is brilliant. There is not one piece in this that is not fantastic. Some more than others, but still. They all have fascinating characters in really interesting situations, described in a different yet not goofy way, that really brings it to life. Loads of great telling details, which is one of my favourite things. And yet, this is actually quite a disappointing short story collection. Because, whereas the first one is a perfectly shaped, formed short story, the rest, you read them and you go, that's fantastic. And what was the point? Oh, that was brilliant. And why? Oh, this is really good. And it stopped. And the way, I think it's because I'm not much of a short story reader. I think the open-ended short story is probably a very legit part of the form, and the fact is, whenever I come across it, I don't like it because I'm a fuddy-duddy when it comes to short stories, perhaps. But what it reads to me like is the first short story which he wrote when she's 19 is perfectly shaped, has a beginning, middle, and end, and the point is in it. And when I say a point, each piece in this has a point. It's just that in a short story, the way I feel it, there should be self-contained items, and so the point should be exhausted by the end. With this, the point isn't, and there isn't really an end, and you kind of just feel, why has she decided to talk about this part of this person's life? Because the thing about a short story is, you've got to create a whole world for 5,000 words. You know, it's just as much work as a novel in some ways, except less writing. So maybe not quite as much work, but, you know, in terms of world building and things. And so it behooves you, it behooves you, I think, when I see it, as a short story writer, that the part of the life of the character you tell sums up their whole life, or is vitally important, or has a purpose in and of itself. And that's not what I'm getting from this. And so, to me, it read like one good short story and then extracts of novels. So Every Tongue Shall Confess, which is all about this religious lady who's being sort of teased. She works as a nurse, and she's being teased by one of her patients about her religious sentiments. Well, that's the beginning of a really funny rom-com about two people from two different worlds who come together. Our Lady of Peace, which is all about this woman who goes to teach in the inner city and ends up finding kids really annoying. I think that's probably the end of a novel about this woman who's trying to find her place and find her peace, and then doesn't quite. You know, The Ant of the Self, which is all about a father and son who go to sell parrots at the Million Men March. That's part of a story about these two men's relationship, and the end of the novel should be them realizing they love each other. This is just a part of the beginning where we're still setting up how they're different. You know, each one had such a world outside of its own that it didn't feel like a short story, which I suppose you could say says of the richness of the writing, but ultimately made the book kind of disappointing because I wanted the whole novel or nothing. I didn't, or a story. I didn't want bits of novels. And that leads us to our final finished book. I'm currently reading My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier, and partly because I was inspired by Vera by Elizabeth von Arnim. Now, I have read two Elizabeth von Arnims, I think on video, and they were both beautiful, sunny, optimistic, inspired by real-life tales. This is a grim, nasty tale of a very unpleasant relationship told in the style of a comedy of manners. And it's all about this woman called Lucy who, on the day her dad dies, meets this man called Everard. And he's upset because his wife died a week ago, and the inquest gave an open verdict rather than saying it was an accident. And so people believe that she killed herself because of him. And they start to fall in love. And we kind of know everything we need to know about this Everard Wemyss, straight from the beginning. Because he's not upset that his wife has died. He's upset that his friends don't think he's great anymore. He's upset that he's lost face. And so that tells us a lot about him already. And as he smothers Lucy, and he loves her, or he thinks he loves her, or he says he loves her, because she looks young, she's short, and she has a page boy haircut that makes her look 12 years old. And he loves this. He loves this young, pliable thing he can take and hold and smother. And it's when they get married that all of a sudden we know where we're at. And Lucy, in her sort of, we go between everybody's mind in this. And Lucy's mind, she's still trying to make excuses for him. So she's saying, oh, when you're married, does anyone else feel utterly exhausted and like they have no life of their own anymore? And she pretends to assume, or does assume, or tells herself that that's completely normal. And it's really not. And Everard never hits her. He's not even that shouty. He does disappointment and he does sulks. And so she really, really doesn't want to hurt his feelings. And he never actually properly tells her what it might do or what it won't do that hurts his feelings. And he just expects her to know. And it's really a very slimy, insidious, horrible relationship. And then you've got Lucy's aunt, who's trying to understand what's going on. And in a normal book, I think Lucy's aunt would have a more sort of physical role of convincing her, or there'd be a big clash between Lucy and Everard, or something like that. But no, this book just stops. And I know I said it was a problem with this, but partly because they're short stories. This was a novel, it made its point. And if it went dramatic, it would have undone the tone, because the tone is comic. What's happening is not comic. What's happening is horrible. But the tone is comic, because Everard Wemyss is a buffoon. He's an idiot. He's a small baby man. He's so pathetic. And we can laugh at him being pathetic. And in fact, Lucy can laugh a little bit at him being pathetic. But at the same time, he dominates her. And it's being dominated by someone that petty that brings the real horror. So the horror is brought by the comedy. And it's, I asked for more of her books because they were lovely sunshiny things. And this was horrible. But it was funny and horrible. And it was entertaining and horrible. It was utterly, utterly gripping. And I really, really loved this book. So, best book of the month. Probably one of the best of the year. Vera by Elizabeth von Arnim. Read it. I've not said much about the details because that's the fun, watching him mesh her and her not seeing it. And partly pulling the wool over your eyes as a reader. It's great. And so, that inspired me to read some Daphne du Maurier. And I've already read Rebecca, so I went for My Cousin Rachel, which is what I'm reading now. But that'll be next month's video. Before then, there will be my video about Muppet Treasure Island, which will come out shortly. So enjoy that. Goodbye.